welcome to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio, how to survive hidden healthcare and hospital dangers with author, speaker, and your host, Pat Rullo. Pat has over 20 years experience as a professional public speaker, and for the next hour, she's going to be your healthcare and hospital survival guide. Each week, you will say, oh, as Pat exposes and explores little-known hospital hazards, delves into the deep waters of dangerous healthcare practices, picks the brains of her good-looking and influential guests, all guaranteed to keep you and your family safe in today's fragmented healthcare system. The Speak Up and Stay Alive radio program is intended to advance health literacy by making you aware of healthcare and hospital dangers. The program is for informational purposes only and is not intended for use as diagnosis or treatment of a health problem or as a substitute for consulting a licensed medical professional. Participating as a program listener, guest, or caller should not be considered medical advice. References to any entity, product, service, website, or source of information should not be considered as an endorsement. And now your host, Pat Rullo.
I can't bear you no more, baby. I got too much pride. But I'll survive.
Hello, I'm Pat Rullo, and I'm so happy to hostess this next hour where I will serve you a generous helping of everything you need to know to help you and your loved ones stay safe during any doctor or hospital visit. Who am I? I am you. I am every person who has ever been in a hospital or doctor's office and has received less than acceptable treatment. I am you, the person who got an infection during a simple outpatient procedure. I am you, the person whose questions are ignored, who struggles to speak to the doctor as he or she has one foot out the door. I am the missed heart attack, the hospital-acquired infection, the wrong diagnosis, and the unanswered call button. This show is not about pointing a finger at hospitals, doctors, or nurses. It's not about a political agenda or party preferences. It's about you, your family, your friends, and your loved ones. It's about becoming informed of all the hospital hazards, what they are, how and why they happen, and what you can do about them. This show is about empowerment. It's about doing everything you can to stay safe during every and any healthcare encounter. Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. Yes, that's OH with an exclamation point, will cause you to say, oh, as each week we delve into little-known hospital and healthcare dangers. When you understand why something happens, you are better equipped to do something to change it and prevent it from happening to you. If enough people begin to speak up, together, each of us can alter the current precarious path of today's unsafe healthcare practices. As usual, today's number one show on patient safety is powerfully packed with information you need to know. Our guest has an unbelievable story to tell you about how her mom was burned by fire during surgery. Plus, we have new radio theater guaranteed to add some wow factor to your day. But now, here's the hospital hazard of the week. Hand washing and infections. We talk so many times about the importance of hand washing and infections that are acquired in a health-related facility. As recently as last week, during one of my live hospital safety events, a woman raised her hand and asked, "Is it okay to ask my doctor to wash his or her hands?" This is a question I get quite often. So with this fear in mind, I created a business card of sorts, something one could simply hand to their doctor without saying a word. I figure if it's difficult to speak up, how about simply extending your hand with a card that says, "I am concerned about healthcare-acquired infections. Please wash your hands before touching me." The cards were delivered several weeks ago on a Wednesday at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 4 o'clock, I walked out on my back door to kayak the Chagrin River like I try to do on most days. After a beautiful time on the river, I got out of the boat and onto the dock and proceeded to walk down the steps. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in wet mud and goose poop. The steps completely collapsed, sheared off the side of the dock, taking me and my left foot down, around, under, and finally the steps landed on my already surprised leg. I sat there for a while, trying to absorb what just happened, and came to the realization that I couldn't stand up. Now, if you've ever seen our backyard, you can actually throw a stone from the deck into the river. So the ground is usually wet, and because Bob likes to feed the geese, we sometimes have close to 100 geese and ducks munching Tractor Supply corn. And that can only mean one thing, lots of foul droppings, which made it impossible for me to crawl back to the house. So I just sat there, and eventually Bob came out to find me, and when he saw me on the ground, he asked if I was doing yoga or something. Silly Bob. Well, to get to the point, we then headed over to the local urgent care, but not before I grabbed several of my new wash your hand icebreaker cards. I hopped into the urgent care and was sent to the exam room. I had my icebreaker card in my pocket, and as Bob and I waited, I said, I'll bet this person comes in and tries to touch me without washing his or her hands. After 30 minutes of irritated waiting, the doctor walked in and headed straight towards me. Well, I smiled nicely and handed her my card. She looked at it, smiled back, and said, I was just going to wash them. Yeah, right. So how easy was that? I got her to do what I needed her to do in a really innovative and cool way. She must have spread the word when she left the room to read my x-rays, because every nurse who came in afterwards to wrap my foot proceeded to wash their hands too. I'm telling you this story because it was such interesting timing that I would be the first person to try out my own cards. So now I know they work. And I tried it again just last week when I took my mom to see a new doctor. He entered the room, didn't wash his hands. I handed him the card. He exited the room and returned with a bottle of hand sanitizer and cleaned his hands in front of us. And after that, he sat patiently and intently answered our questions, took the time to explain things in detail, because he knew that we knew what was going on. These icebreaker cards are a silent way to make a powerful impression, as well as ensure that hands are free from deadly bacteria, such as MRSA and C. diff. They are perfect not only for hospital visits, but regular doctor, dentist, or podiatrist visits as well. And best of all, they work. I'm living proof, thanks to my most timely encounter with the faulty steps. So where can you get your hands on these handy cards? At the SpeakUpAndStayAlive.com website, of course. Join me in the crusade to reduce unnecessary healthcare-acquired infections. Keep these icebreaker cards in your purse or wallet and hand one to every doctor or nurse who approaches you before they carelessly forget to wash their hands. Remember, it is your right, and sadly, it's your responsibility to see to it that that happens. And with that, let's hear some legal news you can use. We've talked about the importance of having a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. But how do you go about selecting the right person for such a serious job? Listen as I spend the next 2 minutes asking Pat Schraff and Allison Mance-McMeechan, my favorite attorneys at Schraff & King, located on Somme Center Road in Willoughby, Ohio, about this. Welcome, ladies. It's a pleasure to have such distinguished and good-looking guests with us today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
So let's get right to the heart of pre-planning. How should we go about selecting a medical power of attorney or a financial power of attorney? What qualities are important?
Well, I think it may be the same person. Often it's not. The person who holds a healthcare power of attorney is going to need to be very comfortable in a medical situation, because sometimes these decisions have to be made in a crisis, and there isn't time to call your brothers and sisters or to call other people to try to make that decision. The person that can make healthcare decisions may not be the right person to make financial decisions. They may not be comfortable with that. They may not want to do that. So when you're looking for someone to handle the financial decisions, you're looking for somebody who's going to be honest, somebody who's going to seek the right advice, and somebody who is going to follow your wishes.
Should we get permission from the person that we select?
I think it's very important. I think you certainly should ask the people that you intend on naming whether it is something that they are comfortable with doing. You do have the ability in both documents to name alternates. So in the event that the person you have designated declines or for any other reason is unable to act, you should have more than one in succession to be able to take their place. But I think it's important that within families, you discuss what your wishes are, you discuss your plan, that everyone understands who it is that you've named and perhaps why you've named them, so that there aren't hurt feelings or misunderstandings at a point when you may be able to not be able to communicate your intentions at that point.
That makes sense.
The key in selecting the people that you're going to name also, as Pat mentioned, it's very important to name people that you trust implicitly. When you're preparing a financial power of attorney for someone, you are giving a lot of power to that person. You want to be sure that you trust them now, because because when they are going to be acting on your behalf, you're not going to be able to oversee what it is they're doing.
That's excellent advice. And how can our listeners learn more about you and your firm?
We have a website. It's www.schraffking.com, and that's spelled SCHRAFFKING.com. We can also be reached at 440-585-1600.
Well, it was a pleasure, Pat and Allison. Thank you for being here today, and I appreciate talking with you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much for having us.
You are listening to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I'm Pat Rullo, your healthcare and hospital survival guide. After the show, be sure to visit the website speakupandstayalive.com for more life-saving information. Plus, that is where you can purchase my book, Speak Up and Stay Alive, the Patient Advocate Hospital Survival Guide. Bring the book to the hospital with you. It's the best way to stand out, and in a positive way. And remember, we donate 2 handmade pillowcases to either a troop member in Afghanistan or to a local veterans shelter for every book sold, with your name on it as the donor. So for a mere $20, you benefit, and so does some well-deserving warrior. And with the holidays around the corner, don't send the routine shirt that doesn't fit or a plastic gizmo or gadget. Give a meaningful and useful gift that really says, I care. Give the gift of healthcare safety. Purchase the book, The Patient Safety Logs. Hey, and throw in some icebreaker cards. It's a one-size-fits-all present that everybody needs. You can order online at speakupandstayalive.com, or you can request by email at speakupandstayalive.com, or call me 440-725-5462. And now, back to the show. You're listening to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I am your hostess, Pat Rullo, and I have a guest today with a topic that most of us have never even considered. While many people have never heard of a surgical fire inside a patient, it happens more frequently than you might think. Exact statistics are hard to uncover due to underreporting and efforts to cover up surgical fires for fear of malpractice suits. Well, today our guest is Cathy Reuter, founder of surgicalfire.org. Cathy was compelled to work toward awareness after her mother was critically burned during surgery. As with so many of our guests on this show who have witnessed medical mayhem, Cathy is an activist committed to creating awareness for medical safety and the prevention of errors, especially surgical fires. Welcome to the show, Cathy.
Thank you.
Cathy, if it's comfortable for you, can you share some of your mom's story with us today to help our listeners understand why you founded surgicalfire.org?
Well, this all started in December of 2002. My mother went in initially for heart surgery, and she had an aortic valve replaced and 1 bypass done. After the surgery, she was in PACU, and I started to notice things. They were having a hard time getting her off the ventilator, just things that didn't seem right. But I was reassured that this was typical for the type of procedure she had. She was put on a med-surg floor, and during her recovery, I began to notice her becoming very lethargic. At that point, I called this to the attention of the doctors, and they evaluated her and felt that it could just be the anesthesia, numerous things. But as time progressed, they realized this was more than that. So they put her in ICU with a pressurized oxygen mask, trying to get her body to oxygenate properly, and that did not work. So they intubated her, and during the intubation is when the surgical fire erupted. After the surgeon came out and explained to me what their theory was, that the skin prep that happened to be alcohol-based and is flammable when not dry, they felt that it pooled under her right shoulder. Therefore, the vapors were circulating around her face. And when they started the bovie to cauterize or cut, whichever setting they had it on, they heard some popping sounds is what I was told. They stopped several times and they didn't see anything or notice anything, so they continued. But what they didn't realize was behind the drape was my mom's face. And the anesthesiologist turned and saw this fire. Apparently his back may have been towards her, and he immediately extinguished the fire. But as a consequence of a surgical fire, we don't think about burns. I had no concept of a burn until this event happened with my mom. it does such trauma to your body that she had, in order to heal a burn, they have to give you massive amounts of protein and fluids. Well, my mom was already 72, diabetic, overweight, so all of that compromised her even further. Therefore, eventually she had to be placed on dialysis because her kidneys were failing. They couldn't process all the protein and fluid. So from that, she ended up having dialysis 3 times a week. She had MRSA, VRE, C. diff. Her body was just riddled with infection. Now you have this massive wound on her face and shoulder and scalp. So that's our barrier for our body is our skin. So losing that amount of skin off your face and having it heal just really compromised her from recovery of her initial surgery. So now you have a cardiac patient recovering from heart surgery and a burn victim.
Wow, and I'm sure they were giving massive amounts of antibiotics as well.
Yes,
yeah.
She was receiving, 2 to 3 times a day, antibiotics to fend off the infections. And ironically, you think the burns would have been the issue, and it was to some degree, but the infections really took a toll on her body because they were massive. She became septic. She had a PICC line in her. They'd have to take out the PICC line, test it, find out it grew some bacteria. So now she had bloodstream infections going on too, in addition to MRSA in her lungs. And she was on a ventilator. The whole purpose of this was to get her to breathe better. So what they figured out later on is that her phrenic nerve was damaged during heart surgery. So she was not able to oxygenate properly, and therefore that's why the trach was initiated for long-term weaning. And they felt confident that she would make it off the ventilator, and that is why they proceeded with that route. Unfortunately, when she's burned, the weaning process stops because now she's sedated for the pain. She's not allowed to breathe on her own. So the machine is assisting her for 8 to 10 weeks without her initiating any breaths on her own. So the weaning process took a long, long time. And at some points, they had her 12 hours on the ventilator, 12 hours off, physical therapy. She could never walk again. She could never close her eyes again. Her eyelids were burned, so they never really closed. And that's a barrier for your eye, too. So now you had eye infections.
And 2 years later, she was still having complications to the point that, well, tell us the story about the dialysis.
I just want to make sure I'm clear about this. Her burns happened at one facility in D.C., and then she was transferred to another hospital in Virginia, where they did a phenomenal job. The entire group there really pulled together, and they worked endlessly to get her off that ventilator. And as she did, she made it off the ventilator. It was the greatest thing. Yet at the same time, it was very scary because you become very reliant on that machine. So not having it there became scary for me, at least. But she did make it off the ventilator. But if she got infected, they'd have to put her back on the ventilator. The trach never came out of her neck, so she had that continuously with humidified oxygen. So at the second hospital, they did what they could for 14 months. Then she was transferred to a state facility in Maryland where it's more of a kind of a nursing, it's licensed as a nursing home and hospital. So different floors are licensed to do different things. She was on their vent unit floor. Even though she wasn't always on a ventilator, she had a trach. At that facility, they called me and said she was very upset, which she had not been prior to this. I went in, I calmed her down, they gave her some Benadryl was their solution. And the next morning I get a phone call that her arm was broken. So at that point, I'm thinking, now what? So I go down there and come to find out they're photographing her arm. They felt that somebody may have moved her roughly or didn't move her properly and broke her shoulder. So now she's half immobile. From that point, that facility would not take her back. They felt they couldn't care for her. So she went to a hospital, and at that facility, she was there for months. We finally made arrangements, and they determined that they would allow her to come home. She didn't want to die in a hospital. She wanted to be at home with me. So we made arrangements for her to come home on December 21st of 2004, and on December 17th, she was taken to dialysis. So she's actually physically taken off the floor, which is something I was not commonly used to. Most of her stay at hospitals, the dialysis machine came to her, but this facility transported to a dialysis unit. And after that, she was brought back up to the floor. The transport person who was bringing her back up was 19 and realized the chart was not with her. So she went back down, got the chart, brought it to the nurse and said, Mrs. Reuters back, here's her chart. The nurse never went to assess her for over an hour. And by the time she went to go assess her, my mom, they found her deceased. And she wasn't breathing. So they called a code, except my mom was a DNR, so they stopped. And she died at that point. But unfortunately, in that situation, it wasn't just your normal death. I thought this can't be happening. I mean, she really fought so hard to stay alive. And I had issues with how they maintained their oxygen tanks at this facility. They were just everywhere, in hallways and patients' rooms, more than one. So it turned out that my mom was connected to an empty oxygen tank. She was never reconnected to the wall oxygen after her transport down to dialysis. So they put them on a smaller tank to transport them down to dialysis, where they're connected to a much larger unit. On the way back up, nobody can account for if this had oxygen, did it run out? Nobody knows. But they know she was connected to an empty transport tank, which is not made to last long periods of time. So in the end, it wasn't the burns or the MRSA or the VRE or the C. diff. It was lack of oxygen that killed her.
I have no words for this. It's just an absolutely incredible story, and I've heard lots of them, and this is just an amazing story. I can see why you felt like you had to do something about that.
And my mom was a very calm person. She never complained. She was a retired kindergarten teacher, and I was so grateful that I had the opportunity that I could talk with her. And, I asked her, I said, I can't help you. I don't know how to help you. She was very calm, and she would say, you can't. She said, I know I'm going to die. And she seemed comfortable and at peace with dying, but she didn't seem at peace with how this happened to her. And that was one thing she said. She said, if you want to help, she said, you need to educate people. People need to be educated, because if they knew that this was a risk of surgery, if the OR team knew and was trained properly, she goes, this wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking about that, and I thought, well, the nurses and doctors, of course the facilities are training them. Why would they ever put anybody in an OR that doesn't know what a surgical fire is? Because the elements are everywhere in an OR, and they're in every OR all over the world. This is a world issue. It's not just a U.S. issue. So I started with that. After she passed away, I took her idea of education, and I did so much research on pulling together resources on how do you prevent these fires, what organizations are there, where is the support for hospitals, where do the manufacturers stand on this? Do they provide training? When they're selling these flammable skin preps to hospitals, are they acknowledging the fact that this has the potential to burn patients? Through my research, all of the flammable skin preps that are out there, yes, they have warning labels on there. So then the question becomes, okay, are we not reading the labels? And the reality is probably not. When you go into an OR, your facility has already approved what's going to be used in the OR. So to my view, it is the hospital's obligation that every single person in an OR setting has the training, whether it's a flammable skin prep or not. Keep in mind, my mother is considered 4% of the surgical fires, meaning a flammable skin prep was used. The other 96% has to do with oxygen-rich environments, which my mother's was not. Oxygen supports combustion. It's not going to spontaneously explode on its own. The three elements of a fire are there in OR. You have fuel, ignition, and oxygen. Those three in combination, when they touch each other, causes a fire, any fire. Therefore, if you go into surgery, I encourage consumers to ask, because if I knew, I would have asked. They need to stop and think, okay, I'm going into surgery. Do you know what a surgical fire is? And if nobody knows, they have no business being in that OR, and you have no business as the patient being there either. I would never have taken the chance had I known what I know now.
And that's why I'm pleased to have you on the show, because I don't think many people think about this, and we're bringing a brand new awareness to folks. Where else, other than hospitals, can we think about surgical fires occurring?
Another place is ambulatory centers. We go to outpatient day surgery centers, quick surgeries, elective surgeries, plastic surgeries, and you don't think about the fact that just because it's not in a hospital, it's still an operating room theater. They have the same equipment most of the time for certain procedures that they do on outpatient centers. So an ambulatory center, if you're having a mole removed, you got to think about that. If you're going to a plastic surgeon, you have to think about that. If you're having oral surgery done in your mouth, that is another place where fires happened. Dentists also have something called an e-surge, which is similar to the Carter and Bovie that's used in hospitals and operating rooms, and that can ignite gauze. Any surgery that is a heck neck surgery, that's a chest surgery above your xiphoid, those are high-risk surgeries for surgical fires.
And from what I understand, even facial hair, mustache, heavy eyebrows, those type of things, they should be covered with something, correct?
Yes, they need to have some barrier on them so they won't catch fire. It's a crazy, crazy topic, and it's not a topic that's commonly talked about. Same time as I'm encouraging people to ask questions, I also think people have to be realistic. You don't not have a surgery because you're afraid that you might be set on fire. I want to be responsible about this. I think patients who need surgery, they need it for a reason, and they need to have it. But you have to ask the questions. We are too much of a trusting society, and we walk in, put our lives in somebody else's hands, and walk away and hope for the best.
Right.
You have to be an advocate for yourself and ask these questions.
Well, if you're just joining us, you found a home when it comes to patient safety. This is Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I am your hostess, Pat Rullo, and today we are talking with Cathy Reuter, founder of surgicalfire.org, and she is sharing her story and information about surgical fires, a hazard that we all need to know about. So what are hospitals doing, Cathy, to help prevent surgical fires?
Atul Gawande came out with the OR checklist, which a lot of hospitals have adopted. They have timeouts before surgery, right patient, right site, right surgery. Something that I have been trying to get out there to the medical community is a surgical fire assessment. It takes seconds to do before a surgery. Are you using a flammable skin prep? Yes or no? Is the patient going to require 100% oxygen? Yes or no? They have a pulse ox. They can monitor the oxygenation of the patient. Anesthesia can do all that. There are things that can be done. But if you have an OR checklist and you add this to your OR checklist, you're bringing this to the forefront in every procedure, at a minimum for head neck surgeries, and you prompt the OR team to think, wow, are we using a flammable skin prep? Okay, let's make sure we have the right dry times, when it's applied and when it's dry. I know some of the companies like 3M have also changed their skin preps to show either they're tinted or they dry a different way to show that it is completely dry, which is a huge positive change in the right direction. My mother did not have that. Unfortunately, the skin prep that was used on her was clear. It's very difficult to see if it's dry. Doing a surgical fire training annually, every year they need to be doing this. Every single person who's in an OR at a residency level that is allowed to be in the OR needs to have surgical fire training. All of these hospitals who allow surgeons, anesthesia, OR nurses, surgical techs, they all need to know what a surgical fire is. There's so many things that can be done, and it's not a costly venture to do. It's nothing that, the information is there on my website. I provide everything I can. The FDA has now contacted me last year, and they started their own surgical fire initiative, which I help with to bring this to the forefront so that people have the information they need to make sure that their staff is properly trained. So honestly, I think the best thing the facilities can do is add this to their OR checklist.
Right. Like anything else, the more you know, the safer you'll be. Cathy,
Right.
How can our listeners learn more about you and what you do?
They can go to my website. It's called surgicalfire.org. And I have lots of resources on there and I keep up to date on fires at hospitals, any fire. If it's an operating room fire, it's on my website. And I encourage facilities to contact me also. I do keep their information confidential because the goal is not to demonize people. It is to really bring this information to the forefront so that we can work together to prevent surgical fires. My site has a ton of information for clinicians and for consumers. I am interested and concerned about fires in hospitals and how to prevent them.
Thank you. You do have a great website, surgicalfire.org. And do you have any final words of advice for us today?
I think everyone needs to remember in medicine, mistakes happen, but we're all human. I look back on what happened to my mom, and a lot of times people ask me, are you angry with the people in the OR? No, I'm not angry. I'm saddened, one, that my mom had this experience and that I had this experience too. But I'm also saddened for the fact that we have to keep the clinicians in mind too. Nobody went in that OR and said, I'm going to burn the patient today. They went in there to do their job. And they have emotions, and they have feelings, and they too have to live with this for the rest of their lives. So I think it's important to keep in perspective that we do need health care, and we all have to try and pull together consumers and the medical community to work together and realize that they make mistakes. You're never going to have a perfect system, but if we have transparency and we learn from our mistakes, you can say, I learned something, we're never going to do this here. But to not learn anything after these errors it's horrendous.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to share your heartbreaking story with us, Cathy. I am so proud for you, and I just know that your mom is too. You know, you've taken such a sad situation and turned it into a huge contribution for all of us. And if there's anything I can do to help you, please just let me know.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We interrupt our program to bring you a special broadcast. We interrupt our program to bring you a special broadcast.
Infection prevention for dummies.
Let's spend the next 2 minutes with our resident expert, Darrel Hicks, an infection preventionist who has the answers to all of our questions. Welcome, Darrel.
Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. I read in your book about spores and bacteria and biofilm, fungus and viruses. Just give us a little history and background about those.
It is the world that we can't see. Our entire world is made up of bacteria, and we have them in us and on us, and so it's this whole world of unseen organisms. But mainly the ones that we want to target are ones that we call pathogens, and those are the dangerous, the ones that make us sick. And it could be virus, it could be fungus, it could be mold, it could be bacteria. So there is a lot to be said about those in hospitals and in healthcare, and they're virtually on every person's hands, on stethoscopes, lab coats, doctors' ties, bed rails, you name it, and they can be found in a hospital.
I read in your book that antibiotic-resistant organisms can live on surfaces for 56 days.
Longer, depending on the organism and the conditions that it's on. If it's kind of a moist, warm environment, it could live longer. And that's why we have to go at cleaning aspects with fervor and with intent, and being able to see with kind of a microbiologist's eyes that world that can do harm.
This was in your book, and I had a question about excluding flowers and plants from rooms with patients with compromised immune systems. Why is that?
There are fungus and molds that grow in plants and flowers and in the soil, especially if it's a live plant. Certainly there are things that can become airborne with pollen from stems of flowers. So for the immune compromised patients, those that are on chemotherapy and their immune systems are really low, we want to eliminate every possibility of making them sick if we can. So we try to eliminate plants and other things that are brought into that patient's room.
So visitors think they're doing a good thing by bringing flowers and plants, and perhaps they're not?
Exactly. I think that the best policy is before you bring them in to ask the medical staff if it's okay. I think that the average nurse may not know that. It's just a good policy just to not take those, bring in the latest People magazine or something that might be good reading material, but try to not bring in plants. I think most patients would understand your concern for their health.
Darrel, so much information. How can our listeners learn more about you and what you do?
They can visit my website, www.Darrel, Darrel.Hicks, HICKS.com. So it's Darrel at DarrelHicks.com, and there's a lot of information on there, and they can order the book there. They can also submit questions to me, and I usually answer those the same day that I get them.
Well, thank you so much, Darrel, for sharing this important information with us today.
Okay, Pat. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I am your hostess, Pat Rullo, with the only radio show in the world that offers patient safety tips served up in a wheelchair, which can only mean one thing, and that it's time to play the game acclaimed by critics, non-critics, and sometimes even self-proclaimed as everyone's favorite game of all time. Ever.
Fear the wheelchair.
Ooh, by now you know that the hospital wheelchair is a high-touch, highly contaminated vehicle capable of spreading infections all over the place. So the wheelchair is now this show's representation of all hospital dangers, kind of like our mascot. So here we go with our favorite game of...
Fear the wheelchair.
Well, each week we just cannot seem to get the clapping and the buzzer correct, and I've come to the conclusion that either this game is way too simple for our advanced minds or we are seriously inept. Either way, I decided to create a checks and balance system, much like a hospital should do if and when they encounter areas of repeated system failures. So this week, let's add another layer to this really fun game. Joe will still read the right or wrong questions. Bob will answer as usual, but now we'll see if Joe agrees with Bob's answer. He's shaking his head. Then I'll give the final explanation as usual. And mind you, I've increased the difficulty level of the questions just to see if Bob, Joe, and you have been paying attention. So listen, as Joe reads some right or wrong statements, and then even though I can't hear you, shout out your answer along with Bob. Is the statement right or wrong? Joe?
All right, here we go. Right or wrong? If a doctor or nurse apologizes for something, that means medical malpractice has occurred.
What do you think, Bobby?
Oh, I think that's wrong.
Do you agree, Joe? You're right, Bob. It may mean that he or she is showing understanding and empathy towards you and is keeping the door open for further conversations. Sounds like a good thing to me.
Right or wrong, a surgical fire needs 2 elements before it can occur.
What do you think, Bobby?
Oh, that's right.
What do you think, Joe?
Correct.
Yeah, well, Bob, you're wrong. It needs 3. And those basic elements are usually present during any kind of surgery. That would be an ignition source, such as lasers or electrosurgical units, a fuel source, such as alcohol-based skin preps and surgical drapes, and an oxidizer, such as oxygen or even room air.
Right or wrong, when naming a healthcare or financial power of attorney, you may not list alternate choices.
What do you think about that, Bob?
Oh, that's wrong.
Do you agree, Joe?
Yes.
Well, that's right, Bob. It's always advisable to name a second person in case your first choice is unable or chooses not to act on your behalf.
All right. Surgical fire happens most often during foot and ankle surgery.
What do you think, Bobby?
Oh, maybe that's right.
Do you agree, Joe?
No.
Oh, Bob, that's wrong. Head and neck surgery poses the greatest risk of fire due to the potential supply of oxygen used from a breathing mask. Always ask your surgeon prior to surgery about the risk of fire and what will be done to prevent it.
Right or wrong, antibiotics-resistant organisms can live on surfaces for 56 days.
How about that, Bobby?
Oh, is that right?
What do you think, Joe?
I think it's right.
Bob, it's wrong. And much longer, especially if the environment is moist and warm, which says to me, clean your hospital room with bleach wipes prior to settling in.
Okay, right or wrong, with Thanksgiving around the corner, safe food and cooking practices are no longer necessary. Everyone is so full, they won't be able to tell if they're feeling badly because they're stuffed or because they've had food poisoning.
Oh, what a question. What do you think, Bob?
That's wrong.
Do you agree, Joe?
Food poisoning, yes.
Oh my gosh, who comes up with these questions? Obviously, that is wrong. With all of the cooking chaos, be especially mindful of cross-contamination like raw turkey juice in the sink or on the counter. And make sure all helpers wash their hands. Remember, the more you know, the safer you'll be. And you heard about it here on Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. Well, thanks, guys, for playing our super fun game.
Fear the wheelchair.
You are listening to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I am Pat Rullo, where the boys and I are keeping you safe during any healthcare or hospital encounter. Coming up, some crazy radio theater. Stay in your seat. Today's O Moment is from our friends at the Hospice of the Western Reserve. Listen as I spend 2 minutes with their CEO, Bill Finn, a very kind gentleman who is here to help us understand how to utilize the many resources they have to offer. Welcome to our show, Bill.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Bill, are there any hospice misconceptions?
Sure, there's quite a few. One of them is that hospice care stops when people pass. And the truth is that the way our program's designed, we continue to support the caregivers for at least a year after their loved one has passed. You know, grieving is very unique and it's very challenging, but it's special to know that Hospice of the Western Reserve has a team of professionals that are there to help you and, you know, in many cases, your children get through these losses, understand what's occurred, and be able to be better in terms of going forward while you keep that memory of your loved one with you. Most people think hospice means you're dying. We tend to think that hospice means you're living and you've made a choice to live your life fully. We don't want people waiting for death. We want to engage you in all those things you want to do and be able to celebrate life and be with your family, be with your dog, go out and do the things that are important to you and make the most of this time you have. So that's why we're here. Hospice of the Western Reserve helps people live fully up to the last moment and then also make sure that their families are well cared for after they've passed. The other thing I'd say is that an educated consumer is the best thing out there, particularly when it comes to healthcare. So the more people find out about what hospices provide, what their opportunities are and choices are, I think the better off they'll be. And to know that Hospice of the Western Reserve really does represent some of the best care in America is a good thing to know as you consider what's available. What we find in 2 national studies is that patients that use hospice care tend to live on average 30 days longer compared to disease-matched patients that don't use hospice. So what we find is when you have a lot of support in the home, when somebody's really micromanaging your pain and your medications, when somebody's there to make sure your caregiver is doing okay, you do better. You feel better. You're happier. You eat more. You're able to think about things other than your pain, and you begin to celebrate life a little bit. So yes, it does make a huge difference having the hospice team as part of your team, whether you're at home or a nursing home, assisted living, or even at our facilities.
That's good to know. Well, how can our listeners find out more about Hospice of the Western Reserve?
Well, they can certainly visit us on the web. We are at hospicewr.org, or they can call us at 1-800-707-8922.
Bill, it has been fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio. I am Pat Rullo, your hostess and author of the book, Speak Up and Stay Alive, the Patient Advocate Hospital Survival Guide, available only at our website, speakupandstayalive.com. Well, are you ready for some radio theater? Listen to our newest drama about Mrs. Fletcher and her husband Ralph as they encounter Dr. Naughty and Dr. Nice.
I've fallen and I can't get up.
I'm having chest pain.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number. No further information is available about 911.
And so it begins. Imagine an unexpected fall, shortness of breath, heart palpitations. Are you prepared for an unscheduled hospital visit? Listen as Mrs. Fletcher and her husband Ralph endure their respective hospital visits.
I'm having chest pain.
I've fallen and I can't get up.
Mrs. Fletcher's neighbor hears her calling and climbs through a cracked window.
We're sending help immediately, Mrs. Fletcher.
Is there any reason why this is taking so long?
Finally, the paramedics arrive on the scene. Ralph is clearly sarcastic.
Well, it's about time you got here.
At the hospital, Ralph is ushered to the second-floor cardiac unit to see Dr. Naughty, while Mrs. Fletcher is wheeled to the X-ray department in the basement where she meets Dr. Nice. Dr. Naughty looks to be of the age where his license was grandfathered, whereby he didn't have to submit to any continuing education. The American Board of Internal Medicine gave lifetime board certification in cardiovascular disease until 1990. Cardiologists board certified before that year have been grandfathered, which means they do not have to do anything to maintain board certification. In 2005, more than half of all cardiologists enjoyed this status as board certified for life. Naughty, wrong, bad. Well, poor Ralph is still in pain.
I'm having chest pain.
No use shouting, old man.
Dr. Naughty approaches Ralph without washing his hands. Ralph listens to Speak Up and Stay Alive Radio, so he knows better, and asks the doctor to please wash his hands. The doctor looks around the room at the nurses and interns, sensing he has an audience, and thinking he's David Letterman, Dr. Naughty replies,
"My motto is, if you can't make them laugh, make them sick."
After a quick rinse, the doctor listens to Ralph's heart.
You're a very, very sick man.
Ralph shakes his head with disapproval of that quick diagnosis. But Doc, I've never had heart problems before. My blood pressure is okay, and I eat healthy foods.
Don't you be the doctor. You report the symptoms. I will determine their significance.
Listen to me, says Dr. Naughty. I am a good man and a good doctor. I know what I'm doing, and you are a very sick man. Here, take this pill. Although Ralph was feeling ill, he still has some good comebacks.
I disagree with you on a lot of this stuff, and I feel like a good man, too.
Dr. Naughty rolls his eyes and saunters out of the room. Ralph takes the opportunity to ask a handsome Australian-looking resident a question in confidence. He had heard that fellow doctors and nurses know who the good doctors are, and Ralph is hoping for some insight. So he asks, "What do you think of Dr. Naughty?"
But he's very territorial. Got to be really careful when you enter into his territory. Got to play by his rules.
Ralph begins to feel extremely nauseated. His skin breaks out in a rash, and he wonders, what was that pill I just took? Suddenly, Ralph remembers that he has several medication allergies, yet the doctor did not inquire about any allergies, and in all of the hullabaloo, Ralph forgot to remind anyone. Too bad he didn't have his Speak Up and Stay Alive patient safety logs with him. There's a special page just for current medications and allergies. When Dr. Naughty returns, Ralph is livid. "Doctor, what did you give me? I think I'm clearly allergic to it. Do you remember your oath?" Although it was obviously a rhetorical question, Dr. Naughty obligingly answers,
Primum non nocere, and that means first do no harm.
And with his head hanging low, embarrassed by his error, he apologizes to Ralph for giving him a drug without confirming any allergies and slinks out of the room. Soon after, an administrator from the risk management department peeks into Ralph's room. Ralph summons him in, and after a convivial conversation about the administrator's accent, Ralph decides to file an incident report and questions the Southern gentleman. How could this type of mistake happen?
"I don't know nothing about that. All I know is that somebody is going to get their ass whooped over this thing."
After several tests, Ralph is told that his chest pains were not heart-related, but more due to the spicy burrito he had eaten while he was raking leaves. Meantime, Mrs. Fletcher is having a perfectly wonderful time with Dr. Nice. Woo-hoo! Dr. Nice washes his hands before putting on his gloves, and as he examines her, he takes the time to ask questions before jumping to conclusions. How did you fall? Have you fallen before? Where does it hurt? Mrs. Fletcher feels so embarrassed to say that she tripped over a rug because she knows that throw rugs are not safe. The only thing she can manage to say is,
"Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't."
Dr. Nice chuckles as he checks her x-ray. Nothing broken, nothing sprained. You're good to go home now. Well, short story long, as my friend Leo would say, the Fletchers were discharged and went back to their home, a little wiser, however. Mrs. Fletcher removed the floppy throw rugs that really served no purpose except to cover a few stains from Ralph's prior messy burritos. She wrote down her emergency numbers and placed them near each phone, and she ordered the patient safety logs and the Speak Up and Stay Alive book at speakupandstayalive.com. What she didn't know was that with each book, she would receive 5 icebreaker cards that she and Ralph could hand to their doctors during their next visits that say, "I am concerned about healthcare-acquired infections. Please wash your hands before touching me." What a powerful yet gentle way to ask without appearing aggressive. When the safety logs arrived, Ralph immediately filled in the page that documents current medications and allergies. Are you like the old Fletchers, unprepared and uninformed? Or are you prepared for an unscheduled hospital visit? Do you have your patient safety logs, a copy of the book, icebreaker cards, and an infection protection bag packed, stashed in your closet, ready to go at a moment's notice? If not, you can find them at the shop page at the speakupandstayalive.com website.
100% satisfaction guaranteed.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our dramatic muse. Fortunately, we don't always have this kind of time on our hands. But seriously, order some of those icebreaker cards from our website and hand one to each and every doctor or nurse who comes towards you. A pack of 10, they're only a few dollars, but oh, so worth it. Go to the speakupandstayalive.com website or call me at 440-725-5462. Well, today we learned about a shocking hazard, and that is surgical fires. I so appreciate the fine work that our guest, Cathy Reuter, founder of surgicalfire.org, is doing to help educate others. Remember, if you're having any type of surgical procedure, ask your healthcare providers about the risk of fire, not only in a hospital, but dentists, oral surgeons, dermatologists, and cosmetic surgeons. And we added a bit of crazy with today's radio theater, meant to make a point with a slight dash of weird. And let me extend a special thank you to some of the beautiful people who helped sponsor this program: Hospice of the Western Reserve, the attorneys at Schraff & King, and Darrel Hicks, Infection Prevention for Dummies. I appreciate their expertise and certainly encourage everyone listening to support the efforts of these fine folks. And listen next week when we talk turkey. We'll be sending a free signed copy of my book to the person who guesses how many times the turkey gobbles. That's next week's show, Saturday morning, where you can find us 2 times from 7 to 8 Eastern on AM 1420 WHK and at 9 o'clock Eastern on AM 1220 WHKW. Or you can always listen live on the internet, WHKradio.com at 7 and on WHKWradio.com at 9. I am Pat Rullo, and I am your guide to safe and successful healthcare and hospital encounters.
The information provided in today's broadcast is for informational purposes only and was not intended for use as diagnosis or treatment of a health problem or as a substitute for consulting a licensed medical professional. Participating as a program listener, guest, or caller should not be considered medical advice. References to any entity, product, service, website, or source of information should not be considered as an endorsement. If you missed part of today's show or just want to share the information with friends, you can download a copy of the show at speakupandstayalive.com. That's speakupandstayalive.com. Want even more information? Purchase a copy of Pat's book at the Speak Up and Stay Alive website. Once again, it's speakupandstayalive.com.
This is Pat Rullo. When you get a chance, become a friend and like us on Facebook. We're called Speak Up and Stay Alive. Then post your questions and comments on our Facebook wall. We may read them next week. Who else do you know who can benefit from this life-saving information? You can keep your group, club, business, or church safe from hospital hazards. I speak live and in person, too. Our events are fun, fast-paced, interactive, and jam-packed with serious information. Your crowd will love it. Just email me at speakupandstayalive.com or call 440-725-5462. Until next week, remember to ask others to wash their hands. You have to speak up and stay alive. Call me, email me.